Thank you for tuning in today. We'd love to share that we've hit 10,000 subscribers. It's been a very interesting journey because we've been building this, as you know, on the side. Thank you for your love. We know it's a milestone and it will hopefully be part of a much longer journey. To celebrate this 10,000 milestone, we are doing a giveaway. Stay tuned till the end of the episode to know more. Please pay attention to the books that I talk about. So I'm splitting my conversation into 20 books that you should read in your 20s. The sections that we are looking at is four, which is building businesses, understanding yourself, understanding humanity, and I have one book at the end which is just for its sheer fantasy and thinking forward. So we'll start with the building businesses section. The first book I have is Zero to One by Peter Thiel. What I'll be doing is I'll be pulling out the books from my bookshelf itself, so that your eyes go to some other book nearby. So this is one of my favorite books. It's not very long, but it's very provocative. I think if you are starting a company, this book is one you should read. If you're not starting a company and you're interested in business, there's also a book you should read. You can see, I've had this for a while. I love sepia books, which have been there for a while. The book is about startups and the zero to one phase. When you're starting a company, the first phase is called zero to one in parlance now, which is you're just a team, you don't have a product, and you want to figure out how to actually take it to market. This book talks about how to do that. I really like Peter Thiel's approach on being really thought provoking. I think one thing that really stood out from this book for me was his definition of going after markets which don't have competition. Generally, a lot of people say, "Hey, go after a market which is large. Go after big opportunities." Eventually, you must. But when you're starting out, what Thiel says is, go for a niche where there's nobody else and win that market. Another interesting thing that he says in regards to competition is the large companies always say that they are very small, and the small companies always say that they're very large. If you have noticed, Google will always say, "Hey, we are 1% of advertising," which is true, but as online advertising, they're like much larger. So I think those two have really stayed with me, even though I read this book a long time. I would strongly recommend you to read this book if you're thinking about starting up. The next book is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. This book is by the founder of Nike. It's a wonderful book. I mean, he's written it from the heart. It's fascinating because I never thought Nike was a startup at some point, because I've grown up with Nike. I'm a big fan of Nike. If you're a 90s kid, which I am, Nike is like ever present, omnipresent, and you're thinking of Nike being a small company at some point really breaks that mental model. And that for me was like very, very fascinating. I think he writes very well and from the heart. Again, it's not a very long book. The most fascinating thing for me, because I'm an investor and I love startups, is the early days, how he went about getting shoes, going to Japan, doing everything that's needed, getting almost broke, and then eventually scaling the company. I think that really, really stood out for me. Other part of actually scaling Nike and making a brand out of it, that also is covered during the rest of the book. Again, like if you are a business fan, if you love branding, and if you just love underdog stories, this is really an amazing underdog story. And you wouldn't think that Nike was ever a small company. Okay, the next one is Hard Things About Hard Things. So this one's written by Ben Horowitz. He's an ex-operator. Now he's part of this fund called A16Z. He's a founder of that fund, and Andreessen Horowitz. So he's the second part of the fund. What I really like about this book particularly is it's very honest. and sometimes it can actually be a little brutal in its advice, and it's why it's called Hard Things About Hard Things. Ben started as an entrepreneur. He's been a two-time entrepreneur before he became an investor, two or three time. I don't remember exactly. And I think his journey of taking hard decisions, hard calls, in the journey of building a startup, which is itself hard, it's very inspiring. And there's some very good frameworks and mental models that he has shared in this book, which I particularly liked, like what you need to do to scale, what you need to do to save a company from dying, what happens when you're in a very difficult situation, you're running out of money, how to operate. I think, the 0 to 1 and Shoe Dog are a little more inspiring, optimistic, and the early days. This is more like the hard stuff about building a company. Building a company is not easy, and I think this book really tells you how to do that. Um, the next one is one that's my favorite. This is Sir Alex Ferguson's autobiography. I think this is the best book on him. Why I call this book amazing and why it is, I would say, a business book, is obviously I'm a Manchester United fan, so there's a bias. But I think Sir Alex was probably the best man manager of the last 20 to 30 years. Imagine having to manage a set of 20 players, 20 egos. You have people like Beckham, you have people like Ronaldo, Rooney, Neville. There are big stars that Sir Alex has managed. Despite that, he has managed to win a record number of trophies. After he is left, we won nothing, unfortunately, so that makes me sad. But how he's built an organization and a team, which is sum of parts rather than being about individual players, especially in a sport where the individual can actually shine. I think his ability to turn it around and actually achieve his dream of eclipsing Liverpool, which was the dominant force and had won so many titles that it was almost impossible for United to catch up. I think that dream, his ability, trusting his instincts, his man management, I learned a lot about architecting an organization from this book, which you wouldn't expect from a sports autobiography. And I think he has some of the deepest insights on human behavior and psychology. So reading this book gives you a very very good insight into how to run and manage an organization. Cool. Okay. No rules. Everyone who's seen anything online would have seen Netflix. I don't know if everyone's heard of Reed Hastings, who's the founder of Netflix. This book is entirely about culture. I think the books that I talked about were Building an Org, 0 to 1, building a team, managing a team. This is about setting culture at scale, which is also about team, but I think this is a little different because running an organization of thousands of people is very different from managing a sports team. And I think the insight from running such a large org, which is also creative, how do you compensate people to stay, how do you have a playbook, how do you hire, and how do you build a culture of excellence and creativity, is what is very special in this book. Obviously, there's the inspiration of Netflix's origin story where Blockbuster didn't even give a damn. Blockbuster was a DVD rental company that Netflix tried to disrupt, and eventually did. Blockbuster is no more, but Netflix is super large. The next book is Innovation and Entrepreneurship by Peter Drucker. I have so many books that I don't know where they are. This book is interesting because it's actually not mine, it's my dad's. I picked up this book randomly once I had started, a few years into investing. I saw it on my dad's shelf and then I've stolen it. But this book is about entrepreneurship and innovation, like it says. I think if you want to learn the theory of how a company starts, how innovation is done, are there any frameworks or principles for entrepreneurship? This is the book. You'll be surprised that a professor can actually abstract and create frameworks for this. I think the one big takeaway from this book for me, which I use almost on a very regular basis, is the theory of disruption. And I don't know if you guys will see it or you will notice it on a regular basis, but let me just take an example. Why does a startup come to life is following the theory of disruption or innovation. Essentially, the idea is that there is a large player that is serving a large market that is profitable. They tend to ignore a small market that's unprofitable. That market is very useful for a startup to attack because there's no large player playing there. This actually kind of ties in with what Peter Thiel was saying, which is avoid competition. What happens is that the startup, because they are attacking a smaller market that is unprofitable, they figure out ways to do it profitably. So they use technology or some innovation. And once they start doing that, they start to gather critical mass and become so big that they start to challenge the incumbent. You'll be surprised in which scenarios this is applicable. This is applicable in Walmart. Walmart actually started one day, of course, they did start. But what they did differently was they set up their stores in rural US rather than going after the big cities. Because the other chains that existed were serving the large cities, which were more profitable. Walmart focused on the rural towns, which were not, and eventually it had become so big that by the time it arrived at New York, it was one of the largest chains in the country. And this is not just true in Walmart. Amazon did the same with Walmart, using e-commerce, which was a niche, and then went up and then began to disrupt Walmart. So we are done with business now. I'll talk about books that give you an idea about yourself. The first one is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Here. I read this book long before it was popular. It's probably been like 6-7 years. It's not a recent one. This book was initially written in Greek and it was not supposed to be published, which is many centuries ago, actually millennia ago. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor. I think he was one of the first after Augustus. And he was a remarkable thinker. So the meditations were actually his reflections on his experience as a leader, as a king, emperor, whatever you want to call it. And I think this book helped me realize that while technology and business keeps evolving over time, human nature is something that doesn't change a lot. We see expressions of greed, envy, fear in many different ways, but these were felt hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, and so on and so forth. And I try to ask the question, which are the things that stay the same? And human behavior is one of those things. It's very hard to change it. And I think this book opened that thought process for me, because the kind of questions Aurelius asks, and it's not the specific questions, but his approach to the questions, like what is power, what is the meaning of life, what should you do, what should be your goals. I think those are the questions people today, like me, also ask. And I think the big trigger or takeaway for me was that human nature is so consistent across time that somebody who thinks so many millennium ago will have similar thoughts or similar questions as today. The next book is Mastery by Robert Greene. Another one that I really like from this author is 48 Laws of Power. That's actually amazing. It's almost Machiavellian, but I can't seem to find the book, so I'm going with this one. This is also equally good. This is about how to be a master. I think the ones that are there in this book that some of you might be able to relate to are Albert Einstein, Mozart, Freddie Roach, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford. But in general, this book has a list of many masters. I think Paul Graham is also there in this one. And the idea here is, first, it talks about the concept of mastery, which I think is has become a little rare nowadays because everyone tries to do everything and not do one thing really well. And how to achieve mastery, how to do it. What are things you can learn from people who have actually mastered mastery. I think the like one big takeaway for me from this book was you need to do one thing very well for a long period of time to actually be successful. I don't think you can think of any person across human history who has done multiple things and you know them for that. And that is because compounding skills, being focused on one thing and one thing only. It's a great book for people who want to, actually become masters and do one particular thing really well. For me, I think it's going to be investing in startups. The next book is Range by David Epstein. This is the opposite of the mastery book, and it talks about how generalists triumph in a specialized world. And why I'm taking this is because I like to learn about counter narratives and see what works well for me. I actually love this book too. The takeaway from this book is actually a little similar to what mastery does, to be honest, because fundamentally, what Epstein is talking about and what Robert Greene are talking about converge at the same thing. I think the difference here is Epstein says that any successful person actually iterates and tries a lot of different things before they figure out what they're really good at and double down on it. The other thing that Epstein talks about is people who are masters at certain things are also good at other things. Like Albert Einstein actually used to play the violin, if I remember correctly. So this book talks about people and range of their skills rather than one particular skill and doing it really well. I think both actually go well together, and the meanings of the two books are not inconsistent, because the mastery book talks about becoming a master, and this talks about range and doing a variety of things. I have noticed that people who are very good at one thing, they're also good at other things. And that's basically the key message for this book. I thoroughly enjoyed it because it was a very different take from the mastery book. The next one, which helps you again focus and learn a little bit about yourself, is Thinking Fast and Slow. Yes. I'm having a hard time finding all the books. And I wanted to make sure that it is me pulling the books out rather than having them as a stack. The funny part is this book was actually part of my course at IIM in my second year on behavioral economics and behavioral psychology. But this book is much more than just what you'd learn in B school. This is actually, I would say, one of the best books I've ever read. And I think this is an example of how some people take their life's work and put it in one book rather than writing multiple books over their entire lifetime. What this book talks about is thinking fast and slow, like the name says. But it's about specifically how your mind has two parts, which they call 1 and 2, A or B. One which thinks fast, which is your intuitive and almost like subconscious mind, and the other is slow, which is the conscious mind and deliberate, logical, rational, etc. And how the two work together, how this entire system actually operates to generate many things. I think these were the first guys to actually document biases. We've seen so many nowadays biases because people find that in investing in their daily life. Sampling bias, recency bias, halo effect, all are there in these books. I think these guys actually studied and documented it for the first time. It explains a lot of behavior that you would see in markets, a lot of behavior that you would see in people making financial decisions, anchoring, loss aversion, like why do people not want to lose money? Why do people want to spread their bets? It's a very fascinating book that blew away all my misconceptions and biases with its study of biases. The next one is Siddharth by Herman Hesse. I think that's how you pronounce his name. We talked about books that are conflicting in nature, and this is actually the opposite of thinking fast and slow in terms of it's just the complexity and the density is much lesser. This is a much easier book to read, but this leaves a lot to the reader to think. This actually is very profound, although very simple. It talks about Siddharth, who becomes Gautam Buddha later, his journey and his experiences, along with how the whole path that he took and what he learned during this, in becoming Lord Buddha from starting as a young king. I think this is a very exploratory book, a lot like Meditations that I spoke about earlier. And for me, it actually helped me reflect because it's written in a very abstract way and it asks you questions about yourself and your spirit, which I don't think I've found in many other books. So this is one that you should actually uh, pick up. So now that we are done with business and self, the next section is humanity. The first one is actually about AI. Very funnily for a humanity section. I read this book recently. It's very, actually, I think this year only. It's called Life 3.0. It's written by Max Tegmark. I think it's a very compelling and I'd say very lucid and engaging book on why we should and how we should handle the advent of AI. It's very timely, given I think a lot of us are now worried about what AI will do. It introduced me to a lot of concepts. The first was technology has, like, I'm a firm believer that technology always makes humanity better. The fear of job loss is always real, but eventually we are so fast at getting better that we figure out what to do. I think the worry is that AI is replicating a human brain. Um, I wouldn't, I'm not in the camp which fears AI. So I would actually say that we should invest and do as much as we can to take AI forward. I don't think it's a real threat to humanity. I think it'll be an enabler. People never got worried when the calculator replaced people who could compute in their brains, and I just use that parallel for AI. But anyway, in this book, talks a lot about the concepts of artificial intelligence, how computers will become better and better. I think this is called Moravec's landscape. This particular landscape is, you can imagine human skills as mountains. The taller human skills are more difficult for an AI to replicate, and the shorter ones are easier. And you can imagine a lake or a sea filling everything. I think that's a very fascinating parallel of how things are going to progress. The next one is Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. I think I read this book. I don't even remember when I read this book. It's probably when I was in IIT. This was like an epic attempt at making sense of human beings. I don't think he's outdone this book. He's written books after that as well. I didn't particularly like the rest of the ones, but how he has explained human behavior, gossip, how people succeed, how empires are built, what makes human beings operate, rise and fall of empires, language. It was a very ambitious book, and I think there were a lot of things that he was right about. I think if you want to really study human history, this is a book you should definitely read, or start with at least. I would definitely recommend reading this book. Um, the next one, which I think is a more layered version or more complex version of Sapiens, but actually has some very different observations and learnings, is this book called The Moral Animal. I think this book is probably, let me check, first published in 1996. So this is a 30-year-old book. And that's why these ageless books are the ones that really stay. And he takes a Darwinian approach to everything, which is love, social behavior, friction between people or fighting, and our morals. I think the first six chapters on marriage, men and women, how the marriage market exists, how people choose mates, where there is morality and immoral, and that blending or blurring of the lines. I think it's a fascinating book. This really changed the way I looked at least the concept of love, mating, romance. It was a very outside and abstract way of looking at something that's really deep and really emotional. I really enjoyed this book. I especially like the first six chapters. I don't think anybody's addressed it. And I think that's the one that a lot of people will like. But it also considers fighting, friction, how people work together, why people are together or not. And I think generally it's not a book that a lot of people have read, but one that I found very, very good. The next one, which is about understanding humanity, obviously you have to understand economics, is Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty. It's a huge book. It's like a tome. There's a lot of math in it. This was one of my first attempts at reading economics when I was in college, I think. Probably in my second or third year. I don't remember exactly, but I definitely remember it was in my final year or whereabouts, just before I had started studying economics in B school. I think what this book taught me about is how to look at inequality, what are the challenges humanity faces, why inequality could be a feature of capitalism and not a bug, and it will probably remain that way. The relationship between wealth and income. I love the amazing proxy that he has a multiple on income to determine the wealth of a country. So if you want to understand what maybe the wealth of India today is, probably 5 to 6 times our GDP. For a growing country, it's a little smaller the multiple because wealth has not accrued for many, many years. For a country that is established like the US or France, the multiples are higher. I think the interplay between wealth, incomes, what it means for societies, and simplifying it into equations, I think it really helped. The rest of the books were obviously more philosophical from a history standpoint, but this one was very centered in finance, economics, and the other aspects of money. So there's one book you should read if you are really trying to understand how economic behavior works. The next one is an entirely, so going macro to as micro as possible. It's called Genome by Matt Ridley. I don't know if it is available anymore. This is another book that I stole from my dad. I think this is from 2000, so 23 years old, 23 chapters, 23-year-old book. It's about the human genome, and it actually tells the story of each of the 23 chromosomes and what they mean for us. I don't think I've enjoyed a book on biology and evolution and just human behavior so much as this. Again, this was really random. I just picked it up and read it, and I couldn't put it down. It really maps well how a lot of our behavior is encoded, how it's passed on, and how a lot of things remain the same. Again, I go back to the point that I had made earlier, which is on how many things about human beings remain similar over time. So this is a very interesting book if you're trying to understand human behavior from an evolutionary perspective. The next one is a very, very ambitious book called Silk Road. It's by Peter Frankopan. He's written another book on climate, a very recent one, which I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's behind me. I think this book, like as a history buff, man, this book is incredible. I'll just flip through some pages. There are some maps here. He starts from, I think, about, let's see, the Greeks and goes up to almost like 50, 60 years ago. Entire 2000 years compressed into this. It is about the Silk Roads. I think all of you who are a little aware about history of humanity, trading, Silk Roads were those really deep and active routes between the east and the west of the world, which is Europe and China and the middle, which have evolved and changed. There's China runs this BRI, which is based on the Silk Roads. The ability to tell the story of most of human beings, because for the last 2000 years, except like the last 200 years, most of humanity was in this region: Asia, Central Asia, Europe, bit in Africa, almost not at all in the Americas, except the last 300, 400 years. I think this is like a new history of the world. It talks about how Silk Roads are at the center of everything that we've done, trading and other such things. I think if you want to get history in one book, it would be this one. The next one is very interesting. I read it recently, but again, it's an old book. It's called The End of History and the Last Man by Francis Fukuyama. I think this book is probably 20 or 30 years old. The key concept here is democracy is the end state of all states and nations. I think we can argue that deeply. And this book, when it was released, saw a lot of backlash, criticism, and things like that. But the arguments are very compelling, and respecting human rights, respecting why people should have access to their economic rights and personal rights, and why democracy seems to be like the best solution to keep us together and peaceful. I think it's a fascinating book, written 30 years ago, so super ambitious. I think the Cold War was just done then. I think it still is very relevant, and it explores a lot of human choices and human behavior at scale, from a state perspective and from a country perspective. So this is one that you should read if you're trying to understand that aspect of human behavior. Another book which is applicable to probably large scale human behavior from an organization perspective is The Square and the Tower. And for folks who are interested in technology, meets history, this is the book. This talks about networks, hierarchies, and their interplay and interlink. So you can assume like a network is Facebook and a hierarchy is like Facebook as an organization. The argument here is the square is a network and the tower is a hierarchy, that there's a constant interplay between squares and towers, that hierarchies dominate, then networks disrupt them and then become dominant, and then hierarchies emerge out of networks, and this cycle continues to follow. I think the patterns are very interesting and quite real. I love when people try to explain why things have happened in history, and this is a very, very interesting book of why the Roman Empire came, and then there was the creation of religions, and then they became hierarchies again, and so on and so forth. So we are done with 19 books. I think the one that I will finish with is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is just so fun and so ambitious. I just love the book. I have like the entire one. You can get in many parts, but I think this is just like a cult classic, especially if you're in tech. You see people putting their statuses as mostly harmless, thanks for all the fish, and so on and so forth. They all come from here. It's a fun book that is also so ambitious in telling a story about the future and sci-fi. As a tech nerd and a geek, I think this is a book that you have to read just for its just clever writing and the way he has approached this whole concept which he created from scratch. I think this is one book that I would definitely recommend for you if you are a sci-fi buff or just would love to read anything that is fun. If you have watched till the end, please do leave a like and subscribe to our channel as we are growing. As I was saying in the beginning, in the comment section, name your favorite book and tell us why. Leave your email ID also along with it. We'll choose 5 lucky winners and you will get your favorite book as a gift from AJVC. We are really looking forward to original titles. I will vicariously use this as a way to learn about new books. As you can see, I love reading. This is not my entire bookshelf. By the way, I have more books in another room. So please do share. Please do give your comments. And if you can get your friends to upvote them, that would be awesome. Uh, Please read, enjoy your holidays. This is a good time to actually read books.